So my name is Nash. I'm a developer evangelist at a company called Twilio. Can I ask who has heard of Twilio at all before? Quite a few, actually. That's cool. Awesome. For anybody that hasn't, we are a communications platform. That is, we have an API that you can use in your applications to connect or communicate with your users by voice, video, messaging, and all sorts of other ways, using the tools, languages, or frameworks that you already know. If you are building something cool with Twilio, or if you are interested to hear more, come find me. I'm in the red and quite tall. Find me afterwards somewhere. I'd love to have a chat. But today I want to talk about my favourite thing on the web right now, which is the service worker. It's my favourite thing. The service worker has ushered in, I think, it's a new era of web development for us. It's the current generation's XML HTTP request. It changes the way we build our applications. And I'm excited because it is now supported in the last version of every single major browser that we have out there. Which, come on! This is very exciting about trying to take applause for that because I had nothing to do with any of that. But it's there, it's supported, and we can use this, we can stop making excuses about not having support. It's a great progressive enhancement anyway, but we don't have any support worries anymore because it's there in all the browsers. And as we saw earlier in Chiro's talk, it's actually really easy to add service worker support and progressive web application support into your Angular application, especially if you have the latest with ng-add. If you just add Angular/PWA, it is zero config, as we were talking about earlier, and just straight away you're offline. I think it's absolutely incredible. It says zero config. Obviously there's some config. This is the default. We've got some work to do, I'm sorry. But it is declarative work in a JSON file rather than kind of trying to deal with the lifecycle of the service work and anything like that. But yeah, I think this is amazing because right there we're straight in with prefetching a bunch of files that we can define and then later kind of lazy loading other files, which I think is really cool. And that's just out of the box. You can add some more stuff if you are proxying off to actual backend server. The data section of that will be your friend as well and gives you options such as optimizing for freshness or optimizing for speed. And Angular PWA gives you a manifest.json that describes your application and gives it colors and themes and a splash page, and it gives you a bunch of icons. You'll probably want to change those icons unless you really like them. But with all of that, you get yourself a progressive web app. It is, it's simply running that line on the command line gives you a progressive web app without even thinking about it. So I actually quite like talking about how to build with the service worker and its caches and how it all works, but that's completely useless here because it's all done for you. So this does allow us, of course, as I said at the start, to give our users better experiences. With this caching up front, our sites and our applications become more resilient to poor or no network conditions. But we can do better than that, because now we have the service worker in the background. Now we have some JavaScript that is running outside of the confines of a page that a user has to look at. Then we can start to build other app-like features, other things that we were missing in the web platform before. And those are the things I want to talk about today. The major ones being push notifications and background sync. And we're going to see how to use these and how not to use them a little bit as well. So first up, push notifications. I'll start with the support on this one, because it's almost as good as that previous slide, with just missing that one. Edge, when it launched, Service Workers launched with push support notification as well. Push notification support as well. And I was very excited about that. In fact, I was so excited that I downloaded a VM of Windows instantly and tested it. And this was it working. You get the permissions pop up there when you ask for it. And then when you request a push notification, you can close the browser. And then up at the bottom corner, just under here, push notification, which you click on, comes back again. It just works in Edge. It didn't require any changes. I'd been building this little example application for Chrome at the time, and I just tried this out. It worked straight away, so I was absolutely delighted with that. This is the can I use graph of support for push notifications, which looks a little more red. Mainly because we've got IE over here, and Safari and Opera Mini and other Safari. But the important part about this one is actually up in the top right there. You can't read it, but it says almost 75%. That's almost 75% of Kali users' global stats are users that have push notification support. The rest are in the remaining IE11 users and iOS Safari users, Opera Mini users. And push notifications are incredibly useful. I'm trying to see if there's any kind of skeptical looks about this. Like, anybody dislike push notifications in general? Have them turn at this point? Yeah, very. Okay. You're going to change your mind about this. Actually, most people are just like, no, turn them off. They're horrible, aren't they? I think they're really useful, and I want to make you believe that too. Because there are good notifications, there are bad notifications. Just a month since I think there was the royal wedding back in the UK, and all I saw over Twitter for that day was, why did I get 7 alerts from my news application? This is hardly breaking news. But good notifications exist, and these are the ones we should be able to build. Appointment reminders is a pretty key one. And I have a few more examples, but this one comes with a story. So at Twilio, we have an SMS API, which is particularly useful for also sending notifications for things. And we have one customer, the Arkansas Children's Hospital, who implemented appointment reminders just a day before, saying, don't forget, you've got to bring your kid to the hospital tomorrow. And it cut their no-show rates on people turning up to appointments from 20%. There's literally children going to hospital. 20%, a fifth of them were not showing up, which is horrifying if you think about it. But when they got reminded, that rate was cut to 2%. And probably SMS is the best solution for this, but if you're booking appointments online as part of a web application, then it could work as a notification from that. If you're booking into I don't think anybody necessarily has a technically up-to-date doctor's surgery or hairdresser, but if you were booking that online, a reminder that it was going to happen would work. Chat alerts are an obvious one. It might be one of the reasons we all dislike them, because one of our employees is slacking us constantly today because we're at a conference and they don't know and they're trying to get in touch with us, leave us alone, all that kind of stuff. But chat alerts are really, an obvious use case for any kind of push. ETA alerts, when things might be arriving. This one's useful for things when you're booking cars or ordering food or getting anything sent to you, just to let you know that it's going to be there, or maybe there soon, or maybe it's there now. Those kind of things are great. And then event updates. If we had an application, for something like a conference, I think is really useful. If if you had multi-tracks, for example, remind you which talk you're going to next and where you're going to, and just give you a little nudge to go that way. But other events count as well. Things like I fly quite a lot as part of my job, and it's exciting to get the push notification from my my airline app, so you can check in now, and I can try and get the best seat because I like legroom. So all of those things are really good notifications, and there's reasons that they are good notifications as well. I think it's because they all show these 3 tenets. They are timely, actionable, and personal. And that is, timely is very much about getting the alert at the right time. If you're reminded of your hospital appointment the day after, it's completely useless, and you're suddenly turning off all notifications again. So it needs to be in time, but there needs to be consideration of other things as well that are not going to annoy your users, such as at the right time of day, like not when someone's sleeping, for example, leading into that in the right time zone. And finally, the right number of notifications as well. If you are getting just constantly buzzed by something, it gets really annoying. And if that's your application, then somebody's going to block those notifications. These things are actionable as well. And that's kind of one of the more important things to it. Like, if somebody sends you a message, then you want to read that, you want to reply to it probably. If a car has just arrived to pick you up, then telling you it's here, this means go, leave the house, get out of here. And you can check into your airline app. You can go do this, and it will help you. And then they become personal as well, because all of those things are at you. This is why, news notifications, while some people might like them, are mostly terrible, because all they've got out of those 3 is timely. They're not personal and they're not actionable, so they just kind of sit there and aren't particularly useful. So that's how I think we can build good push notifications. And it is fine if you do want to turn them off yourself, but I believe that these things can help users. If there are good reasons to send them a notification, it will help and improve the experience for that user. Now, how we do it is another thing. I'm just going to give a quick rundown of how we have to put the code together to make push notifications work, because it's a little bit of messing about in various different places. We start with the user in their browser. We have to ask permission. Well, we have to register ourselves as a service worker first, actually. To register a service worker, and once we've done that, we can then use that service worker registration to ask permission to send push notifications. You've probably seen this in your browsing of the web, where the little pop-up comes up saying, hey, this site would like to send you push notifications. Once the user, if the user clicks yes, allow, you get you get three different bits of information. You get a URL, which is the endpoint it's described as. This points to the push service of the browser, and you get two cryptographic keys, which you can use to encrypt the data that you want to send over the push notification. So with those, you need to save those to your server. And once you've done that, that's kind of that side of it done. Now when you want to send the push notification, we're going to make this happen from the server. We do so by sending a post request to that endpoint that you got. In this case, the cloud is the browser's push service. So you can encrypt the data, turn that into a payload, and make a post request to it. Now, there are a bunch of libraries out there that make that easier for you, especially because there's another side of another bit of encryption getting done as well. I'll get to that in just a second. But make a post request with your data to the service. The service will then send a notification down to the device, which will wake up the service worker. The service worker then wakes up and it sends that notification not to the browser but to the device. It will appear as a native notification on your laptop or on your Android device, because iOS doesn't yet support this. So that's kind of how it all goes around. The other bit of encryption stuff that gets dealt with is VAPID. VAPID stands for Voluntary Application Server Identification for Web Push. Right? You see that works? Somebody really wanted to call it VAPID, I think. But VAPID is actually the way that your server makes itself known and understood to the push services of the browsers. What you have to do with VAPID is create yourself a public and private key. If you use the Node module web push, then you can do that on the command line with generate VAPID keys, and you get a public and private key. I won't be using these ones. Actually, the public key is more private because it's actually truncated there. Anyway, once you've got those keys, once you request to make that request the user's permission for subscription for access to push notifications, you have to set it up using the public key. So the browser will send that home. And then when you're sending the push notification, you actually sign a JSON web token using the private key and add that to the payload. Included in this JWT should also be an email address or a URL where you can be contacted by the push service in case of abuse or anything else. And that just identifies your application. When you then send a push notification using that private key signed JOT, the push service can decrypt it. So it's using asymmetric encryption on that token. It decrypts it with your public key and can know that that's who's sending this push notification. This is not necessarily required by all browsers, but I believe it is required if you're doing this in Chrome. So might as well do it for everything. Push notifications in Angular are actually quite nice and easy because it's not the PWA module, but the service worker module that's included by the PWA module includes an SW push service. And I'm going to show you how that works right now. So I'm just going to dump out of here. And I have just a little application running on my machine. Hopefully it's still working. It's just an SMS inbox that I built with the Twilio API. And it sort of works slowly when the internet's slow. I'm just going to pop to the settings, and I can subscribe to push notifications, and that's our little box there that's going to allow me to do stuff. And unsubscribe, which means I can then go to my phone and send it a message. I can do is actually close Chrome. Not completely close Chrome on the desktop. That Chrome is still open, but I'm no longer on the website. On Android, however, you can completely close the browser, and it will still wake up with a push notification. I'm just going to write a quick text message there. And what that should do is follow that kind of path. There it is already. That was quick. And if you can see that up the top, there we go. Push notification arrived saying, "Hello, Angular Conf." Sadly, I can't click on it and reopen the browser, and I'll get to that in just a second. But it arrived, and I said hello, and it all exists, which is cool. And that's how it works. I actually have the code here just to show you that. Shout if you can't read this, but I did check and it should be all right. Basically, the entire code in the front end, as part of the Angular application, is this bit. You request a subscription with your web push public key. Once you get the subscription, send it back to your server. It's got a fancy toJSON method on it, so it just turns it into JSON, all the things that you need, and sends it back to your server. Back on my server side, this is the simplest server in the world where it just stores it straight in memory, right here. And then when the SMS comes in, it notifies a webhook. And this is the web push module that's building up that message. So this is the notification. What's quite nice is the service worker installed by Angular gives you the event to respond to push notifications straight away. And all you need to do is send a notification key and value inside this data, and use all of the keys that would flow straight into the notification API. So Angular then deals with that for you. In this case, it's a title and a body. You can also send icons, images, actions, other things you can do with a notification. These are my Vapid details. As I said, that's used to sign a key. It's all done via the library, which is nice. The library finally then goes, send the notification. Cool. And then, yeah. That is push notifications. The thing that's missing, the reason I couldn't click on that notification and reopen the site, is this. A handler within the service worker to respond to notification click. You can do a bunch of stuff with this, but you can't get to it in Angular. You can, but I'll get back to that in a bit. But right now we can't respond to that click, which is a bit of a shame. What we really need to talk about, I think one of the other reasons that people dislike notifications, particularly on the web these days, is that permission side of things. This is a tweet I found, which made me sad. It's probably a little small, so I'll read it. Dear website, I don't want you to post notifications to my desktop. I don't want to subscribe to your thing via pop-up. I don't want you to know my location. Please stop auto-playing that video. I'm angry and sad now. Web developer, I'm not blaming you, but some web developers in the world are making their users sad and angry, and they're tweeting about it and getting thousands of retweets, which is truth these days, obviously. It's making them sad and angry, and that makes me sad, because we can be better than that. Because the web has grown in scope in the last few years. We now have a bunch of more powerful APIs that are more privacy kind of invading as well, so we need to ask permission to use them. Things like push notifications, like geolocation, media devices, like your camera, your microphone on your device, Bluetooth, MIDI, Web USB, all those kind of new fancy ones that are slowly coming through the standards process and arriving in browsers behind flags and out of flags. There's a lot of them. But we're seeing sites produce this kind of experience. This is Product Hunt. If you go to the first view, it straight up says, hey, we want to send you push notifications. And if this is the first time you've ever been to producthunt.com, do you want their push notifications? You might do, you just don't know. They're not the only ones. This is CNET. if you want notifications of tech news, I guess. Click yes there. This is sitepoint.com. This is a double hit here because we have the permissions for push notifications pop up and a full site overlay asking you to subscribe on your first view. This is what it should look like. This is actually what SitePoint is, a tutorial site for web development. And on the first view, we get two overlays trying to get us to do stuff we don't even know what it does yet. We're supposed to know what they're doing. It's a tutorial site. And it's not even small sites that do this. This is YouTube. This is not the first time I've been to YouTube, but still there is a zero context permissions overlay there, which I'm disappointed about. The problem is no context. I might want these push notifications from any of those sites, but I don't know if I do yet. And I'm a developer. I know how this works behind the scenes. But if you're a user, you're probably clicking block straight away, and that's sad. So we need to stop this, or users will stop this. There's actually articles appearing online on such fancy web pages as How To Geek, describing how you can block all of these notifications in your browser. And if people are, presumably this is pretty good for SEO, because people are searching for it, and it was worth writing an article on it. And this tells you exactly in how to, in every browser that has this enabled now, turn it off. So I have one kind of plea out of this talk, which, as I said, I'm not blaming you, but if you've ever talked to somebody that's done this, if you know of, or if you see it somewhere, just stop. Please do not demand notification permissions, or indeed any permissions, straight on page load. We have to give users context to know what so that they can use all that context to interact with your site or your application as best as possible. As I have a worry about this, that permissions will come to new pop-ups. That's my worry. We have all of these things we have to ask permission for, but they will come to new pop-ups. Users will hate them. There'll be permissions blockers. They'll instantly block things. Permissions will be reviled and straight up dismissed by users. And that is terrible. That's potentially terrible for us as developers, where we could be giving these good experiences via useful push notifications. But it's also bad for them, because once they block these notifications ever appearing, they may miss out on something that is actually useful to them. They may miss out on that notification that their flight is now delayed, and so they turn up to the airport 10 hours before, rather than just waiting for a bit. Because this is all it takes to block all of those notifications. This is the settings screen in Chrome. It's actually quite hard to find, which is more useful for the developers. But on the notification that comes through, there's actually a little settings tab, which you can click and go to settings and block straight away. And you'll never find this page again. It's 3 pages deep in the Chrome settings. It's a little less deep in Firefox. But as a user, you're never going to be too excited to go turn things back on that you definitely switched off for a reason. So please, just don't demand permission to these things on page load. There are suggestions for better ways to do this, of course, one of which is to wait. We need to build up that context for a user. A really good example of this was from the Chrome developer team, the advocacy team, Matt Gaunt on the team, who made this kind of example application. This is an airline booking app. And once you've finished booking the tickets, that is the point where, down at the bottom here, it kind of says, hey, do you want notifications for flight delays? And as a person who's just booked a ticket on that airline, like, I probably do. At that point, you click on it, you get the permissions dialog, and you know what you're going to get out of this. Of course, if that application then sends an advert to say there's 10% off flights, you can go block it. But you've got a good reason to get to that point. Unless, of course, it's super obvious. Like if you're in a chat application, if you're in Slack, having that kind of bar above the top that they've done means that you know what you're signing up for. You're going to get notifications about your incoming messages. Still, it's not a permissions dialog on page load. It is a notification to say, hey, do you want this? And you can go close that in the top right corner, and that won't come back again. But you haven't gone and blocked notifications for the entire site or the entire web. And finally, we actually need to let users opt out from within our applications as well. So in my example, in Chrome, I actually had, go back to the settings, a button there, so I can unsubscribe straight away. That just turns them all off, revokes my permission, the app's permission to send notifications, and that's cool. But if you have a wide variety of permissions, of notifications that you want to send to people, and I use this is the Twitter iOS application, and it's a set of things you can turn on and off to buzz you about various tweets. No, Twitter, I never want to hear news from you. But I can turn it off here, and I can still get the notifications I want. And so if you are doing multiple different notifications, then allowing users to opt out within your application, it's going to save them going to the alternative, which is I could block the site, or I could block all of them, and we don't ever want them to do that. So, hopefully you agree with me that push notifications can be used for good, and that you may have use cases where you can use them for good, and that Angular makes it nice and easy for you to do so. So, let's move on to background sync. I'm really excited about background sync because it's, again, something just new for the web. And if we have caches in our service worker APIs, they're pretty much for GET requests, right? It's responding to all those fetches for more content, more assets, more things like that. That's great. Background sync is for those post requests. It's for when you're submitting a form. And it's going to save that for you, because we can't just respond with static content to a form submission. We need to do something else about that. If the form could not be submitted because the user is offline, we need to do something about that. Background sync makes that possible. Background sync is full of things, form submissions, things like sending messages, things like posting comments, adding things to a shopping cart, liking or favoriting things, anything that requires that post request, or a put or a delete, anything that's going to change something on the server. Background sync sounds like it's going to run constantly in the background, or occasionally in the background, and that's not the case. Background sync works brilliantly when you're offline and try and do something, and then you come back online. To me, it's more of a back online API than a background sync API. I think the syncing kind of oversells it somewhat. Quick note on support. It's not great. It is in Chrome, and it's not in Mojave yet. Edge team are working on it, Firefox are working on it. Don't know about Safari. Not entirely sure about Opera at the moment. This is really useful for mobile applications, mobile web applications though, because obviously Chrome on Android is the biggest browser there, but in, I think, probably third and fourth place are Samsung Internet Browser and UC Browser, which is huge in Asian countries, as far as I recall. They both, because they ship the same kind of versions of Blink that Chrome does on Android, they support it as well. So those Android mobile web applications can really take advantage of this. It's going to need us to get comfortable with IndexedDB. Anybody a fan of IndexedDB? 2. Cool. Yeah, it's not the nicest of APIs, but we need to store some data. We need to store those requests that we're trying to make so that we can replay them somehow or do something about them. IndexedDB is our only choice for doing that. It's not the only choice for storage on the web, but because we're using this in the context of a service worker, and service workers pretty much only deal with asynchronous, promise-based APIs, IndexedDB is the only one that can fit into that. And it's not naturally promise-based, but we can turn it into a promise-based database with libraries. Local storage, which is obviously much nicer and easier to use as a synchronous store that just will not work in your service worker context. So we need IndexedDB. And the plan with background sync is when a request fails due to the network, which we can catch in either the front end or within the service worker, save that request data into IndexedDB, and then register for a sync event. So use the service worker notification registration and its sync manager to register for a sync event. Then when the user comes back online, that sync event will fire, and we can go get the stuff out of the database and replay the request or not. You can put your own logic into this. If you have a kind of a TTL on how long a message or a like or something should wait before we decide not to send it, we can decide on that. But that's the basic idea there. Request fails, so we register for a sync request. When the user comes back online, the sync fires in the service worker, and we can go do all the stuff there. And I can show you this one working as well. I'm going to go to the new message page here, and I'm going to turn the internet off. Cool, so I'm offline. I think it should still work. Cool. The service worker is working nicely. I'm just going to send myself a message. I just drag that there and bring mine up there. Cool. Hello. I'm offline. Cool, that's sent, or it says it's sent, and I went to the conversation view of the application. What I can do now, it's not gone anywhere, but it is tucked away in IndexedDB. There it is. That's our hello from offline message. Cool, it's been saved. If I now turn the Wi-Fi on, we'll connect back to the Wi-Fi hopefully. And once it does connect back, that's going to trigger that sync event in the background in the service worker. The service worker is going to reach into IndexedDB and send the message off to the thing. There we go. It's sent me a message. Hooray! If we go refresh IndexedDB, that's also cleared out of there as well. I can show you the code for this one. This was all set up by a messaging service that I injected into my component. And when this fails, so caught the error, I just used the message store service to save the message into IndexedDB. And not quite as easy as using the SW push service. I actually had to reach to the actual navigator of the real service worker object for this. Service worker.ready returns a promise that resolves with the service worker that's been registered. And so once it does resolve with that, I can use that registration and the sync object on there to register for the sync event. You can tag this event. So in this case, I tagged it as outbox. And that way, you can, inside your service worker, deal with different tags in different ways. And then, through the error, so I got console error. And then inside the service worker, I have this on-sync event, or an on-sync event handler. And in this case, I'm using an IDB, which is an IndexedDB library by Jake Archibald, which wraps it all up in promises. To basically go in, open up, create the object store, and then this gets all my messages. And then right here, we map over the promise, we map over all the messages, send them off to the API, and then once they hit the API, happily deleting them. And once promise to all resolves, after all the fetch and deletions resolve, the service worker can go back to sleep. Now this is kind of awkward because I've actually had to open up ngsw worker.js, which lives inside node modules /service worker inside there. And that's not cool. It's kind of, I need to get hold of the service worker from inside the inside its module, because there's actually no way at the moment within Angular to add something into that generated service worker file. It's a bit of a shame. So this is the workaround I've been using for that. I kind of only discovered it recently myself. It's an npm module called patch package, which allows you to make changes to a package within your node modules folder. And then, because you're not checking the node modules folder, it creates a patch file that you can check in, and then it gives you a task that you can run that then will patch those modules. It's an interesting little thing. I don't think it's probably the best case used in this instant necessarily, because this is a more than 3,000 line service worker file. We probably shouldn't be playing around with the internals of it. But this is the only way we can, at the moment, get a background sync listener or a notification click listener if you want to deal with push notifications a bit better. So there are issues to fix this, which is a good thing. And if you are at all interested in this, then I recommend you go get involved on GitHub. One is asking for support for background sync, the other is handle notification click. The thing I think with both of these is that they introduce the service worker within Angular does an awful lot of stuff for you based on that config file that you produce, that it's produced in your site. but the way you handle a notification click, the way you handle a background sync is going to be different per application. And so the Angular service worker is really good at being a generic service worker, but we need to find a way to safely inject our own code into that service worker and allow it to run. That's really the issue behind both of these open requests. And it's going to count for more things as the service worker becomes more powerful as well. So we do need to work around, or we need to figure out a way to work around this. If you, get involved. So the alternative at this point is actually to dump Angular service worker entirely, which is not necessarily a bad idea, because there are other great tools out there as well. One of which is Workbox. This one is built by the Chrome advocacy team, I believe. Workbox, I think, is brilliant. It has a generator as well, so you can give it a similar kind of config file to the Angular service worker one, and so it can deal with your kind of hashed files and all that kind of stuff itself. But it also has really cool stuff like this. This is the background sync plugin that you can use. And what you can do with it is basically register a route right here to respond in a certain way. You can use a network-only strategy here. And what this does is, if the network, this automatically does the thing I built there. It sits in the service worker, catches failed requests due to the network, stuffs the request data into IndexedDB, and then when the sync event happens, gets it out and replays the request. These 5 lines do that all for you. Workbox is kind of magical. And it has other strategies for how you handle your caching, how you handle other things as well. It has a lot of knowledge in it because it's been built by this team that's been evangelizing about service workers themselves for 4 or 5 years now. 3 or 4 years now. So Workbox is a pretty good alternative to your Angular service worker. And so I hope you can see we can make better experiences for our users by enhancing our forms and not having people hit upon error messages and things like that in their browsers just by using background sync and capturing those failed events and playing them again later. I've got one tiny section left, which is the experimental section. This one I'm not going to do a demo for because Chrome Canary changes every time I try and do it. But there is one last experimental service workers feature that I really like and I'd like to see more of in the browser as well. And that's background fetch. This one, background fetch is used to do large downloads in the background. So you can set up a download for something for a user that they don't have to sit on the page and wait for. And it looks a little bit like this. It's very similar to the sync event, really. In this case, you can give it a tag, which in this case is downloads, and a list of URLs, so you can do more than one download at a time. And then you just register for this background fetch event. You can give it some other stuff like icons and a title, which affects the browser UI. But when you do this, it's just going to start a bunch of background downloads for you. And then in the service worker, you eventually receive the background fetched event, which kind of says, hey, we're done. And you can update the UI, you can send a notification to a user, or whatever you want to do at this point. And there are other events for if it fails or if it gets aborted for some reason. And this is really useful as we start to build these, applications that we do split out into chunks. And actually, other things such as audio and video, large files that users want to perhaps download in order to view or listen to games, if they happen to have a lot of JavaScript or whatever, if you can do that downloading in the background, the user doesn't have to hang around on your site to make it happen. And things like WebAssembly, again, probably for games, where you might end up with a large chunk of something else to download. Rather than having a user sit and look at a spinning wheel for a while, you can have them go do something else and notify them when this game is ready for you. That's what I think this is really useful for. As I said, there is 10 dodgy support for it in Canary right now, but it's interesting to go and play with and see what you can achieve. So the background fetch, take a look at it. I will publish these slides online after I'm done with a whole bunch of links where, with more descriptions about all of these things. But in conclusion, I think the service worker is cool, obviously, as well as this slide. If you're looking to play with the service worker kind of on easy mode, then that ng add Angular PWA is so good, and it gives you all this stuff out of the box. And once if you decide you want to go deeper into some of those features, or use some of those features that don't quite exist in the Angular service worker yet, you might have a bit more work to do. These things are not just features, they're not just technology that we can use. We look at it as, I look at it, I got excited the first time because I went, push notifications, is that cool? Or syncing things, that's cool. But really, ultimately, it's about creating those better experiences for users, experiences that the web hasn't been able to give them yet before. And that's what I want to see all of us go out and do after this. And that is it, yeah. Thank you so much for joining me.